Many people believe that humans are born to die and that even if we could extend human life, we shouldn't. I hate that idea and believe that thanks to AI, we are on the brink of a biotech revolution that will radically extend human life. To help us explore this frontier, I bring you today's guest, a scientist and entrepreneur who believes that at a minimum, AI is going to dramatically alter health span, and that will have thrilling consequences, as long as we don't mess it up. With that in mind, I bring you Dr. Mehmood Khan.
Given the fact that most men lead lives of quiet desperation, why should anybody care about extending their life?
Well, let's think about it from a society point of view and an individual point of view. Okay? From a society perspective, if we can keep the majority of people functional and healthy, and I'm going to distinguish between what we think about as healthy versus independently functional, active contributors to society and their family and their loved ones. If we can do that, society should care. The GDP impact, as calculated by Andrew Scott, a professor at London Business School and Oxford University in England, and others who have verified this data, have shown that the impact in the US in terms of GDP is around $1 to $4 trillion of GDP impact just for a 12-month extension of healthy life. Not maximum life, but just keeping us healthy. So society absolutely should care. Medicare, the UK NHS, any of these organizations cannot currently afford the healthcare costs of just providing healthcare to people as they age. It's not possible today. We haven't figured out the solution. Well, the alternative is just keep people healthy. They have not only less need for chronic care, but they continue to contribute. Now, at an individual level, most people I talk to, and there's been lots of surveys done, people want to remain independent, active, and health not defined by a 20-year-old. If you ask somebody 20 what is healthy, and you ask somebody who's 40 or 60 what they mean by healthy, most 60-year-olds will say, hey, can I continue to be active? Can I have the mental capacity and physical capacity to be independent? And can I contribute professionally or personally in a meaningful way? That's one aspect of what is being, quote, a healthy lifestyle, right? Most people care. That's what they want. People don't want to live longer. If you ask them the question, do you want to live as long as possible? And in their mind, that's 30 years spent in a nursing home. Nobody that I know wants that. Very important distinction.
No doubt. Now, I look at the moment that we're in right now as an incredibly disruptive moment. There, certainly as somebody that lives in the US, you can feel the tension ratcheting up. You can feel the sense of divide. And when you look at what things exacerbate that, anything that is going to negatively impact the economy is just going to put you in a really precarious position. When we look at what's going on in terms of government spending and the pyramid that's about to flip upside down, where we go from most people are young to most people are old, and there are fewer young people to take care of them. When I look at the problem currently of an aging population where health span is not taken into consideration and it's just lifespan, and now we're spending just gobs of money on supporting people from a healthcare perspective, are we doomed if we don't rectify this situation and get those healthcare costs under control?
Well, I wouldn't use the word doomed. However, I would ask ourselves, what are the options we have? Those are challenging if we do. No action is a decision. And if we don't take any action and business as usual, we've seen what's happened the last 20, 30 years, exactly as you point. There are economic challenges. Now there's labor shortages on top of that, and developed countries where the birth rate has dramatically fallen. The life expectancy over the last 60, 70 years has been extended by at least 30 years. Let's say 20 years of that is requiring significant resources from a healthcare system. Given that burden, societies are asking ourselves, what can we do? And it's itself divisive, because if you're a young person in a pay-forward society, and developed countries are a pay-forward society, by the way, so are developing countries, just it's not structured. And so in a pay-forward society, I'm a young person working today. I'm supposed to be paying taxes so I can take care of the last generation. Well, if there's a few of those, as you point out in that pyramid, that's okay. That's part of being. But so all of a sudden, if you're in China and you're one grandchild with 4 grandparents, how am I supposed to contribute to that economic model, let alone personally having to take care of? That's divisive, right? How am I supposed to do that? So what are the alternatives? It's going to have to be innovation across the spectrum, which means everything from policies of how we think about are taking care of society, down to technological breakthroughs. And I don't mean just biology, the whole spectrum of technology, to allow leverage of the fewer and fewer young people we have, as well as the ability to use fewer people to generate more and more activity, both financially but also services, right? That's true leverage. And industrialization over the last 100 years has allowed humans to create huge leverage in every aspect of our lives. What we have to ask ourselves now is, what is that next S-curve of that leverage, right? How can technology help us? What are the policies that will enable that? What's the financial policies that will do that? What are societal norms? How do we enable all of this? And there's multiple aspects of this, not just biology, and which means something that you do for a living. We need to start talking to people in the terms that they understand. And one of the biggest gaps, and I've been in science 40 years, is scientists can't be on their own telling this story. Scientists are not good at telling this story. And what we learned in COVID is what was being said as an expert was not what was being heard. In some cases, it divided us. So I would say part of the challenge that we have to overcome is we got to figure out how to get people on the same page to understand what the challenge is, but importantly also, based on clear evidence, point out the opportunity. And the opportunity is huge. Everybody benefits. One other thing about divisive. What we have to think about is the haves and the have-nots, not just within a society, but across the world. Every human being is aging. But imagine a world where you have technological breakthrough, which allows a population and individuals to remain healthy longer, more productive, more able to contribute to their society, all great. But if the only civilians and society that can do that are rich countries, then the economic divide between the rich and the poor countries will continue to widen. If that happens, we're going to increase this challenge of haves and have-nots. So it's very important that we ask ourselves another question. On the assumption that we can have technological progress, and I'm pretty confident that will happen, how do we democratize it? How do we make sure that the masses are impacted in a way that whether you are less well off within the United States or are financially more capable, you have access to this? The only way to do that is democratization of technology. We used to think that's some ubiquitous dream, but cell phones told us and showed us that very expensive technology can become ubiquitous. It required not just technological breakthrough, but innovation in business models. And it was innovation in business models that democratized cell phone technology. The poor rickshaw driver in an Asian country has a cell phone. We would not have imagined that possible even 20 years ago.
So you talk about the opportunity being massive. What is the opportunity exactly? Just extending the healthy life expectancy?
So let's take a look at, we define retirement age, let's say 60 or 65. You know, this was defined, as I'm sure you know, around World War II by European countries, and the number was picked because most people didn't live past 60. So it was a great model, right? Well, I'm going to guarantee you a government pension if you live past 60. Well, if 90% of the population didn't do that, I didn't have to take on responsibility. So guess what? 70 years later, our definition of retirement age in most countries is still 60 or 65. We're assuming that after that age, you're no longer contributing in a meaningful way and you become a net recipient. Well, the first thing that raises is, as soon as you turn 65, are you now no longer contributing? I would say people are. churches, charities. If you look at informal contribution to the GDP in the United States, in Europe, and the UK, and many Asian countries, older people continue to serve next generations. In countries with more formal employment, why should there be? In particular, when knowledge workers are actually in high demand because there's fewer of them. So these are the sort of links that we have to think about and say, what is it we're extending, right? We're extending health throughout your life, allowing you to contribute through all stages of your life. Then it comes down to choices. I'm not saying everybody should be working till they're 80 because they don't have a choice, but we can choose to contribute, and everybody has a chance to contribute in different ways, whether it's taking care of your grandchildren, providing support to your local church, your local charity, volunteering at the local hospital, or continuing to work as an executive. New careers. You and I have had more than one career. Why should it be one career or two careers or three careers? Why can't it be four careers? Now, is society set up for that? Are we as employers set up for that? I'm going to be provocative. What's the mission of an educational institute if it only serves you in your life until you're 22? Is that the only mission of an educational institute? Well, maybe we have to ask us university presidents that their role in a society is far more than taking teenagers and giving them college degrees.
Give me an example. What would you want them to do?
Why couldn't an engineer who was trained in the 70s and 80s be now retrained as a data scientist and an AI?
Because they won't want to be. So this is my big concern, and I'm gonna pull a dark cloud over us for a second. By nature, I am optimistic, but reality is constantly trying to convince me that I should be way more pessimistic. Mm-hmm. And you said societal norms, and I think that may be the thing that we most have to think about. And when I think about, okay, people have been raised thinking that they're going to get to retire at 65, that they can then put their hand out, they have an expectation that somebody's going to look after them. That, like you said, works when you've got a ton of people under you and most people have died by then. You're one of the lucky few that's alive. It does not work when you're super top heavy. And that is the position that we're running towards. And I feel like everybody has this sort of generic sense of either AI is going to save us, robots are going to save us, magically coming from a US perspective, we'll be able to print our way out of it and just print money and be able to give money away and everything's going to be great. And the reality is, I think that people are going to have to fundamentally shift their perspective. But historically, especially when debt gets involved, the only time that people shift their perspective is when there is literal bloodshed. And so I find that deeply distressing. And so when I think about how do we migrate people to the real opportunity so I am very hopeful that not only can we extend health span, but we can extend lifespan. I don't want to believe that we're stuck at 120. I know we don't have evidence yet, so I won't back you into the corner of telling me that it is possible. But all of that is such a radical transformation that even if we just isolate it to the pyramid is going to flip. Demographics, they're set. There's no way to suddenly have a lot more young people. You can have a lot more infants, but you can't have a lot more 20-year-olds. It takes 20 years to get there. So the pyramid is going to flip. And now the question is, how do we flip that pyramid well? And I think if we don't change societal norms and expect people to live and work longer and contribute more meaningfully to basically their own caretaking, their own healthcare, contributing to GDP, all of that. If we don't figure out a way to psychologically get people on board with that, we are going to have a catastrophe that I have not mapped out yet to figure out exactly what that catastrophe looks like, because you have very angry old people. In fact, now that I say this out loud, the problem you will run into is they will continue to wield political force. And now you were referring earlier to what's known as the Gini coefficient for people that have never heard that word before, where you get a massive divide between rich and poor. Right. I'm going to guess, though I've not heard of it, that there's an equal psychological principle that is political power. And if you have the old generation wielding all the political power, you will get an uprising of young people who just won't tolerate it. Help me see a way out of this.
So most of what you said were in full alignment and agreement. It's interesting because everything you just described is not to solve a technical problem or a scientific problem, but actually a societal norm and therefore leading to, if possible, policy reform. But you won't get policy reform until you get the political clout to want to do it. To re-emphasize one of the things you said in terms of the challenges, one of the things that I read, and I'm sure you saw this, during COVID, people were starting to actually write in publications, and I remember a letter published in the London Times actually stating, why don't we let old people die from COVID instead of shutting up society?
Oh.
That was in the London Times. So the fact that it got published is not their opinion, right? In a free press, but it tells you if somebody's willing to write a letter in a highly visible publication, how many people were thinking that? Okay, so that's starting to be seen. If that letter is some evidence for that, people were questioning in more than one country, quote, we're being shut down just to keep old people alive, right? That was COVID. What is it, 80% of deaths occurred in old people. And so we've already witnessed that. Now the question is, what are the learnings? And I'm a little bit more optimistic simply because when we look at rapid technological change and embracing technology in the past, industrial revolution, everybody was scared. All these manual workers are not going to have any jobs. Guess what happened? GDPs grew, new professions got created. Then we saw that when we started to see agriculture start to get industrialized. Agriculture was the primary employer, and guess what? In the United States, Europe, it's a minority employer now. So we've seen this. When we first started to see computers come, word processing, printing, the internet, lots of jobs got displaced. The newspaper industry is a relatively minor media industry today. Go back to the days of, the heyday of newspapers. It's very different. Media has become what you do. Very powerful, reaches far more people. So we've seen this. And once people start to experience the positives, they start to embrace. The question really is, how much of it was forced? And how much of it was it people saw the opportunity? If you'd asked travel agents 20-some years ago, what do you think of the internet? You'd have got a different answer than the traveler. So I always think, how do I get the consumer to actually understand the opportunity and embrace it and then bring them along? That needs to be set. Then science provides the solution, not the other way around. If we lead with the scientific argument, we're going to end up in a very scary place because it's misunderstood. So I'm a little bit more optimistic because I've seen there were times, let me give you an example. There was a time, if you go back post-World War II, people used to hide a diagnosis of cancer. It was a taboo. So if you got diagnosed with cancer, you didn't tell anybody. Why? Because cancer was a lethal diagnosis. If you got told cancer, it's done, it's over. It took a pioneering woman who took on the cause of breast cancer and said, I am going to create public awareness that cancer can be conquered and the world doesn't have to be this hiding taboo. Guess what? The National Institute of Health was created as the National Cancer Institute. It took a whole movement. And over the next 40 years, we found the mechanisms of cancer. And in many cases today, cancer is treatable and curable.
So what's the analogy that getting old is not the terrible thing that we once thought it was, that you can be thriving and a strong contributor as we get older?
Most people's mindsets, the consumer, you ask, tell me what it means to get old. And the first thing they think about is the visible part of people that might think that it's onset of dementia, pain, immobility, rigidness. They won't use those words, but all the negatives that are associated with the decline in function of our bodies and minds as we get older. That's the image. So if you ask people, that is the inevitable outcome, that's what they see. And yet, it is clearly evident that loss of function at the pace that we've seen is not ubiquitous and certainly not to be assumed is going to happen to everybody. In fact, in the majority of cases, it is likely something that can be slowed down, if not halted. Now, how do you bridge that current understanding with the technical reality of what's possible? And one of the reasons I avoid about saying we're going to live longer, although I'm not actually questioning whether we can live past 120 or not. I'm a pragmatic person. Let's show that we can keep people healthy as long as possible first. And if one of the benefits of that is that people live longer, so be it. But the primary goal right now, in my mind, as a personal opinion, is keeping functionality and healthiness for as long as possible, for as many people as possible. I always add that. This is not for the benefit of a few wealthy people. This should be for everybody. If we don't do that, we're going to have a true societal challenge.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
Yeah, it's a very nice way of saying that we will have revolt on our hands. It does become a dystopian nightmare very fast if one class of people are able to buy their way to immortality and feeling good and all of that, and the other cannot. But it's going to start there. As you look at this landscape, as you lead people through this landscape, I think that that's going to be one of the big challenges that you face. How do you think about that right now in terms of one, what breakthroughs are real? What's happening right now? And then how are we going to make sure that that is cheap enough that everybody will have access to it?
So first of all, let's look at the fact that there are real differences which seem to be not just simply purely driven by biology. So if you look at the
Differences in what?
Life expectancy is a start. If you look at the United Kingdom, if you live in Glasgow versus if you live in London, your life expectancy is at least 10 years shorter in Glasgow.
Now, are you saying that's class-based?
It's certainly zip code based, right? We know that socioeconomic situation, which is correlated with your postal code or zip code, is an important driver of that. How much of that is choices versus lifestyle versus the environment you live in? All those are complex. Now, without getting into the biology of all of those interactions, it's clear that our human life expectancy and maintenance of health is driven by some factors that appear outside our own control. It's a function of where you were born and grow up. On the assumption that if you're in Glasgow versus London, or some parts of Chicago versus another part of Chicago, wherever you look, there are clear disparities. Those disparities are helping us understand what are the mechanisms driving that. We can keep populations healthy by understanding those differences. That's one public health, population level evidence. Another we've seen is populations living in certain parts of the world, the so-called blue zones, clearly have longer life expectancies. What is the difference there? What is it about growing up in some part of Italy or some part of Greece or some part of the northwestern part of Pakistan and India, parts of Japan? All over the world, there are these blue zones. What is different about those populations? And it's easy to say, well, it's their lifestyle choices. But there's clearly learnings in that. So that's the human evidence. Now we look at animals. We have observational evidence that different species live longer, but more importantly, starting with very simple single-cell organisms, which was first shown decades ago, all the way through now to primates, monkeys, we've shown that interventions, including therapeutic potential drugs, not approved drugs, potential drugs, in some cases drugs that could be repurposed, can change the life expectancy of otherwise randomized, matched animal groups. So that's reason to believe that this is possible. Now, is it safe? What's the optimal way of doing this with humans? Those remain to be determined. The last piece, and I'll give you an example of this, it raises the question, if biological loss of function has happened, can that decline be slowed or reversed? Well, if you think about the evidence from things like epigenetic reprogramming, without getting into too much of the technical jargon, essentially, our DNA sequence, our genetic code, is the same today, at my age, in my 60s, than the day I was born. My genetic code hasn't changed. The ability of my cells to read that code and replace themselves clearly has changed. So the question really is there something wrong with my genetic code? Or is there something that I'm losing the capability of translating that genetic code? There's more of it there than the genetic code because my DNA is the same. And it's already been shown by people like Yamanaka, who got the Nobel Prize for it, that you take adult cells and you can actually change them back to genetically pluripotential youthful cells. So the code was always there. Now, there are animal models that it's been shown in already, in rodents, mice, and now even in apes and monkeys, that you can take a diseased tissue in a living animal, reprogram its cells, such as in the retina, and restore function. And the most powerful evidence was on the cover page of Nature from David Sinclair's lab at Harvard, where he took animals that lost vision from glaucoma, an age-related eye disease, and restored their vision by epigenetically reprogramming their retinal cells. That's powerful. It tells you what we used to think was permanent, loss of vision, actually, to a degree. Now, how much of it was restored, we can't measure in an animal, but we can show that it was an animal who couldn't see light, now can see. That gives us a lot of optimism technically to figure out what's the next step to go from, we went from worms, yeast, to mice, to monkeys. The next step is how do we take that to humans in a safe manner? We're that close.
What are the breakthroughs that you're most excited about in longevity?
You know, it's a common question. I get that since we're an investment team as well as a science funding team. If I knew the answer to that, it'd be $1 trillion answer. I think there are several both pathways and lines of evidence that excite my team, myself, my peers in other organizations. We're actually approaching this, say, where is the highest chance of success in keeping a portfolio? But I've been in science for 40 years, and one thing I learned is you have to maintain the portfolio. I'm of a school of thought that I don't think it'll be a single breakthrough. Some people think, we're going to find the pathway that results in age-related decline, and we're going to be able to treat it. I think it's going to be different pathways to different levels of emphasis and importance in different humans. And what we're going to figure out is what they are and what combinations of those are most active in you versus most active in me. And if I can personalize it to that level, then I'm likely to address this. And I think the simplistic view of I'm going to find the elixir of youth as one molecule that we're going to put in the water supply and suddenly everybody is so naive and it underestimates the complexity of biology and the ability of biology to adapt. We've had 1 billion years of evolution of life. It has created all sorts of intricacies. We have to recognize that aging is common to just about every living species originating from that one common cell 1 billion years ago. And if it's that primeval, then it's probably got multiple bifurcations over the 1 billion years of life's evolution. We need to understand this is where AI and the modern technologies, where computational capability and biology are coming together, are going to unlock some of that. It will be more nuanced and personalized than that. Maybe in your case, your eyes are aging faster than your heart. In my case, my heart might be aging faster than my liver. In another person, we all know people whose body has aged, but their mind is sharp. We know other people whose brain has aged, but their body is young. And so we know just from observation, aging is not a single uniform effect. It's a common term for probably a lot of very diverse processes which manifest in people in very diverse ways. Yeah, I hope that gives you some context.
It does. I'm going to paint a picture of the future, and I want you to tell me where I go wrong. So when I think about extending human life, I'm talking primarily about the combo of health span and lifespan. So this is only exciting for me anyway. If we make 120, you can count on that. And the way that you can more or less count on getting to 65, I want to be able to count on getting to 120 and feeling like $1 million. Okay, so if I were in your shoes and I had to start making some bets, the thing I'm going to be going from first principles. And the thing I would want to bet on is what are going to be the things that can identify the patterns. So my base assumption that everything rides on top of is that the human body is, one, to your point, it's individualistic. So you have to be looking at the level of the individual. But there are going to be large patterns that you can pull out of the data. So while every human is going to be different, I will learn a lot more from population level data sets on humans than I will from mice, right? Mm-hmm. So AI is going to be able to parse through all that. And instead of us taking these rough swags at blue zones and what is it that they have in common, it's really going to look at, okay, I'm going to take, let's say humans fall into 42 categories. I'm going to break the humans into 42 categories. These are the chunks that they break into. These are the people that age brain first. These are the people that age heart first, whatever. These are vascular diseases. Peter Attia breaks these down into the 4 horsemen of death. He says heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and type 2 diabetes. All right, type 2 diabetes is all lifestyle choices. That is a self-made problem. But
By the way, I disagree on that, but we'll come back to that.
Really?
Yes.
I'm very eager to hear about that. The other 3 or 4, depending on your take, are almost certainly just predispositions for a weakness to aging. So, okay, I'm making bets. Number 1 is going to be AI. It's finding the different patterns. Number 2 is going to be how are we going to go about grouping those things, whether it's the 4 horsemen or something else. And then how do we actually go about resolving those issues? So much of this is going to be about vasculature is my gut instinct. And so how do we actually go in and address those? One is going to be lifestyle. So just whether it's a wearable device or whatever that tells me to eat this, go to bed, here, there, whatever, and you remove from me the need to think about it and to know. It just tells me what to do and I do it. But we're also either going to have to find a way to make people care less about doing the things that we'll call bad behavior. So take Ozempic. Ozempic as a weight loss drug just makes you less hungry. And so you don't have the sort of human compulsion to go eat that thing. So now you're not doing a bad behavior that's going to cause you a problem. Or I have to create something that stops the bad behavior from being bad, if that makes sense. So those would be the areas that I would look for. Pattern recognition, investing in AI. Probably AI again in terms of getting down to the individual level and sort of wearable technologies about what you should do when at the individual level. And then the last stop on the train, whether it's going to be drugs or other medical interventions, actually going in at the cellular level and making the changes. So those would be the 3 buckets that I would be thinking about where I'm looking for the innovations. What's the flaw in that thinking?
So let me add a 4th. So I wouldn't say there's a flaw in the 3. I think they're all valid. Come back to the choices.
Type 2 diabetes. Yes, we'll come back to that for sure.
There's a 4th. And that is in the broadest, and we can get a little bit more specific in a minute, but in the broadest sense, our only real way we measure age today is based on your birth certificate. I look at the day you were born and I tell you this is how old you are. It has almost no way of understanding, even when I've aged, that these 2 people are of a different age. And we can all know 60-year-olds that look perceptively 80, and we know 60-year-olds who look 50 or 40, right? So there's a clear difference. Some of those may be choices they've made over their lives. But people have aged differently. But we don't know how to measure from one person to another. How do you measure age? Okay? Let alone how do you measure it at an organ level? Okay? And yes, there are technologies that talk about methylation of DNA and this and the other. But to measure age in an effective way, you need to be able to measure three things. One, I got to be able to measure what your age is today. However, if I can measure your biological age today, that doesn't help me other than I'm going to tell you something you probably already know, which I feel older than I am, or I feel younger than I am. So it's a diagnostic with little other utility, perhaps helping you intervene more in lifestyles more aggressively with one person or another. I don't know. The second thing that measurement has to be able to do is to be able to predict for me the gradient and the rate at which you're aging. Now, that's a much more powerful measure, because if I could measure your rate of aging when you were 30, I might be able to tell you you're on a much steeper slope than somebody else, and therefore you should pay attention to this. I don't have that technology today. And the third characteristic it should be able to do is it should be able to reverse if I make the intervention, which means I can demonstrate to you, but because of the intervention, whether it is lifestyle or it's a treatment or a device, this is predicting you're going to live 10 years longer. That fourth variable does not exist today technologically. Until that happens, we are not going to be able to design the clinical trials, the therapeutic protocols, the clinical protocols by the clinicians in the field to actually be able to do something about it. I'm going to give you a diabetes analogy. When I was I'm an endocrinologist. I spent my professional career treating diabetes and researching diabetes. If you go back to the 70s when I entered medical school, hemoglobin A1C was not available. Finger stick blood sugars were not available to be able to do your own blood sugar. And even those did not become useful until it was shown by the diabetes control and complication trial that A1C correlated with outcome of complications. Now I had something to say to my patients saying, this is your A1C. If you bring it down by 1%, your risk of eye complications goes down by X. The equivalent of that doesn't exist in aging. So it is going to be very critical for investment and funding to answer that question. Hasn't happened. The NIH has not seen it as its mandate. The UK Medical Research Council has not made it a priority to actually invest in developing the science to be looking at the so-called biomarkers of aging with the three characteristics that I just showed you. Somebody's got to do that. Now, industry won't do it because you can't patent these things. I don't want them patented. Why? Because if you patent them, you will restrict their general adoption. And if you restrict the general adoption, you won't get a standard benchmark by which to compare things. So I just want to make sure there is a fourth pillar that very few people are talking about, and yet it's the key enabler to the others. The other three you just said are not going to happen until we get this done. So that's one. So should we be investing there? Absolutely. My organization, we've clearly said, listen, you've got to go after this and make sure it's open source. Why? You want the best science to be adopted by industry, by the regulator, recognized. Remember, and I'm sure you know this, statins didn't take off until we had LDL cholesterol. It was the fact that we could measure LDL cholesterol as a predictor of vascular risk and something that correlated with reversibility of that risk that you started to see a whole family of drugs. What's going to happen in aging? Got to do that. That's number one. The second is, while these exist, we are free-living humans. Exactly to the point. Now, how do they interact between them? Is it truly a biological intervention versus a sensor and a device? And at what point does a biologic become a device? And when does a device become a drug? We are actually at the point with nanotechnology and all these other new technologies where it's questioning even our scientific definition of these separations, let alone our regulatory definition. What if it's a combination of a device and a drug that's delivered in a certain timed way? Should that go for regulatory approval as a device or a drug? I can tell you there's challenges, even in our regulatory environment, because we don't know where they fit. We're trying to reverse fit things where biology doesn't naturally go there. So it's more nuanced, is my point, in that. And this is where we're having to now start to say, where can we unravel some of this complexity? And I totally agree with you. Big data AI and large population sets will help us do that. But at the same time, I'm a firm believer in bringing the policymakers and regulators to the table. This meeting we're at today is very much including that, because we need their guidance, and they're coming along on this journey to help us understand, so we deliver to policymakers what they're going to be expecting and help them shape us and vice versa. So that's where things will change.
All right. So when I think about blood sugar, a continuous glucose monitor is whenever somebody asks me, what should I do to radically change my health? My answer is always, if you let me put a CGM on you and you let me dictate what you eat simply by the readings that I get on your CGM, I will change your life in ways that they couldn't possibly imagine. Fat loss being the easiest, but your joints hurting, your sleep patterns, all of it is going to be dramatically impacted by that. Is there anything in the literature, because I know you're going to hate the sort of vague question, is there anything in the literature that indicates what aging actually is, or are we literally blind at this point to the nature of aging?
I think there's a lot of literature that tells us what the aging process is at a cell level. Very, very strong literature around that. A lot of, to a lesser degree, but still powerful literature that helps us understand the aging process at tissues and organs. In various different organs to different degrees. We're starting, probably the least understand might be the brain. But in other organs, we're starting to understand that. Musculoskeletal, bone,
Is there anything that the different systems have in common?
There's a few. For example, senescence, the so-called accumulation of what the lay literature has sometimes called zombie cells that are not functional, but haven't died and got eliminated. Senescence is a fairly common phenomenon that we're seeing. Telomere elongation is a common phenomenon and observation. There's a lot of question marks whether it's something you can intervene on. Is it
elongation? Isn't it the shortening of the telomeres?
Yeah. But elongation, is an intervention.
Got it.
Right? And so those are common. Which of those are mechanistically a cause and are reversible, right? Senescence probably has some of the most powerful literature.
What causes senescence? Is it the breakdown of the methylation of the DNA itself?
Well, so what we know is what senescent cells are not doing is functioning normally. What we know is that they're releasing molecules in their vicinity, so-called, paracrine effect, local effect of these molecules, changing the function of normal cells, recruiting and attracting inflammatory cells into those tissues. So we know they do all of these things. Why some cells become senescent and why some individuals accumulate more senescent cells than others, that has not been fully understood. On the other hand, we have knowledge that certain molecules, treatments, drugs, can reduce the senescent load of tissues. We also know that reduction is associated with improved functionality. So our knowledge has progressed all the way to understanding that mechanism in this pathway, for an example. It is ready, and there are clinical trials going on in humans today where drugs that actually reduce the senescence load or reduce the impact of that senescence actually are underway today. So that's an example.
What's the mechanism that they're targeting? Are they just trying to kill the senescent cell, or are they actually making the senescent cell perform better?
3 lines of interrogation or trials. One is target and eliminate the senescent cell. Just reduce the senescent cell load. One of the challenges there is how do you identify very precisely a senescent cell from normal cells and eliminate them? Another is to reduce and buffer the impact of that senescent cell, right? Either by reducing its function, etc. And the third is change the decline of the normal tissues as a response to that. So there's different pathways that are being approached. Of course, we have to remind ourselves that senescence exists at certain stages in our development for important functions too. recovering from healings from a wound requires some of those senescent pathways. So completely blocking them and eliminating them to zero may well be quite detrimental. So what is the sweet spot? So we know, coming back to your question, there are powerful mechanisms that we can intervene. We're learning with precision how to do that. Will that happen? One of the things I would say, I'm confident eventually we're going to figure this out. We're at that stage right now. It's a matter of time, resource, and investments. Who will figure that out exactly? Of course, if we knew that, that's the only company I'd be investing in. That we don't know. We think about the mTOR pathway, right? It's a commonly quoted pathway. Everybody's heard, or many people have heard of, why don't we just give metformin to everybody? And this is, going to slow down. It's probably one of the most widely used drugs, as you know, for diabetes. Clinical trials in patients with diabetes has shown that survival is better in metformin-treated patients. Nir Berzilai and others have shown in multiple publications that this is a powerful impact. It is proposed that metformin's benefit is working through that mTOR pathway. Can we come at drugs that are more specific? Very encouraging data, including in humans. Have we proven it yet? And will everybody benefit from it without risks and side effects? Those trials, some of the trials are underway. So we are at human trial stage in a number of these pathways.
Are you taking metformin?
One of the things I've learned to do as a physician is never answer what I take.
Really? Because you're worried people will copy you, or what?
Exactly. So as I said to you, I'm an endocrinologist, and then one of the commonest questions I'd get is, well, if you were in my place, would you take it? And I always turn around and say, if I was in your place, I wouldn't be treating myself.
Interesting. On a podcast, that's a terrible answer. I will tell you that right now. So here's my take on this. Let me know what you think. I've had a lot of people on the show that do take that take a whole host of things that are getting a lot of praise. And I have not taken any of them because I am so paranoid about isolating compounds. And I have a very bad feeling that so often something that's marked as a wonder cure now, a year from now, is, oh, actually, sorry, that was killing you.
Yeah.
And I'm super paranoid about that. The fantasy thing that I hold out hope for is AI and just the ability to recognize patterns in an unbelievable volume of data. And that right now feels like the missing piece to me is we need a way better understanding of all the complex interactions. So for instance, maybe if you are diabetic, taking metformin is incredibly advantageous, and the length of your life would have been shortened were it not for metformin. But if you don't have diabetes, taking metformin now actually shortens your life. It's going to be complex. Or if you're getting enough sleep every night and you take metformin and are diabetic, then it's advantageous. But if you're not getting enough sleep, blah, 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 that you end up with a lot of complex interactions. And until we can look at the whole data set, how much sunlight are you getting? Genetically, how well do you produce vitamin D? Like, there are going to be so many complex interactions that unless you're really looking at something that's truly N of one, you're never going to be able to figure out what the right play is. And so for me, the thing that I'm trying to do is stay alive long enough for us to get to what is often referred to as escape velocity, so that you for every year that you live, we now add more than a year to your life expectancy. And so theoretically, you are immortal. I don't think we're ever going to actually achieve immortality, but that's probably a different conversation. Yeah. So because I'm not a doctor, I don't mind telling people what I do, but I would really tell people to be wary of isolating compounds.
Let me respond and react to one of the things that you said, I think, which is very powerful. And it raises a dilemma we have in society and in the field. Clearly, if you have diabetes, and unless you have a contraindication, metformin, in most doctors' opinions, is the first line of drug. We also know as clinicians that if you are at risk of diabetes and have impaired glucose tolerance, giving you metformin is likely to delay the progression to full-blown hyperglycemia based on a threshold for blood sugar. Now, it's a continuum, so it's sort of an artificial biological threshold, but we call that a threshold, right? There is no drug approved by a regulatory agency for the prevention of diabetes, even today. There are diabetes drugs, and there are diabetes drugs that we know reduce the progression, but they're not approved for that. There are lots of reasons for that. But one is to take a drug like metformin. Do I advocate that everybody who doesn't have diabetes should be taking metformin? No. Some people can have significant reduction in vitamin B12 levels, which has complications, which can cause harm. We know your ability to build muscle from resistance exercise. I'm not talking about big bodybuilders, but resistance, which we know is a good thing, is mitigated if you take metformin. So you put on less muscle if you take metformin. So we need to understand not only why, but what is the implication of that for the individuals who do take metformin, and how do you overcome that, right? Is it more exercise, a different lifestyle? So there are always trade-offs. And to your point, we need to understand, well, there's a way we can do that. We can do a randomized controlled trial of healthy individuals, look at known age-related endpoints, and do a metformin trial. Why hasn't that been done? Well, first of all, and this is a personal opinion, it's a drug that's very cheap, 5-10 cents a pill, if that, no patent. There's no branded version that is going to sell to make money from it. And so industry, for good reasons, no shareholder is going to pay a company CEO to go and put lots of investments into proving the metformin works. On the other hand, government agencies don't typically invest in doing large clinical trials for generic drugs. It's not on their radar screen. Who's going to do it? And so I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves in this whole field of what I look at as repurposing drugs is when drugs are either near off patent or have gone off patent, can they be repurposed based on much greater science understanding after they've been on the market to where else they could do? That requires a couple of things. One is the funding. The second is, drug companies compete on my drug is more effective than yours. It's a good thing, right? That's the private sector competitiveness. But it raises the question, should we ask the industry to pool all their safety data? And so that for the common good, safety becomes essentially open source, so that as drugs are on the market, we start to understand their safety profile. Because the benefit of a drug is two sides of an equation, efficacy and risk. It's both. We talk a lot about efficacy, but we can actually accelerate our understanding of safety by a lot of this changing and sharing data, even while a drug's on the market. And then after it's gone off the market, really pooling that. How do we bring that about? The AI on just a population level data set will get you so far. Actually studying large data sets of people who've been treated in structured trials will give you a whole other level of complementary depth in understanding. But you need to have access to more than one trial. Do you see where I'm going? So those data sets, and I'm not talking about the publications where you do some meta-analysis based on the data that's published, but actually getting at the source data and really interrogating it will open up all sorts of things. Now, that raises litigation questions, risk, all of those, but they're all solvable. The last piece of this data, I don't think we're going to be able to really unlock the power of AI and large data sets until we start to understand how do we do that, protecting privacy, but without blocking access to it. And so that's going to take...
Mean, without blocking access to what, the data being collected?
Right now, if I went into a government data set in most developed countries, and I said, I want to look at the population data set to really understand this, I cannot just simply go in as an academic researcher. I can look at claims data, if the Medicare, for example, gives me access to it, but that tells me reimbursement data. Claims data only tells me what was optimized for billing. Can I get into understanding actually what the clinical record showed, not what was billed? And there's lots of literature that shows that claims data, I'm using as an example, does not fully represent the clinical data set.
Do you think people should have to assume it was anonymized, but should people have to reveal their data? So I'm imagining a future where we're wearing it's not a CGM, but you're wearing something that's monitoring your blood levels on, let's say, 100 different variables. And we're also tracking mortality. So I can see this person has this blood profile and they live this long. They have these ailments. They complain about this. Again, anonymized. But do you think people ought they, I won't even say legally, do you think morally they ought to give up their data?
You've raised a powerful point, right? And very insightful question, which is, to what extent do you balance the individual versus the common good? Right? This principle applies not only to medical, but lots of things. And there are lots of areas where we do give up our individual rights for the common good. Take a contagious infectious disease. We did this in COVID, right? If you were COVID positive, we gave up certain choices. And in some countries, you actually had a passport. And if it was positive, you could not enter certain buildings. We gave that up. Wearing a mask was giving up our individual choice for the common good. So it really comes back to what extent are we going to ask people to do this, and to what extent? So as a scientist, do I think there's going to be a huge, significant public health and population level benefit? Absolutely. But I'm not a social scientist to understand what will it take. Okay. I am very wary simply because we're living in an increasingly divided, cautious to use a very mild term, but the world is almost to the point of lost trust.
Almost.
Right? Lost trust.
I would say we spilled over.
Yeah. And if that's the case, then asking people to go that far, I don't know how it's going to happen in many countries. People are going to have to be convinced of the word you said, anonymized. I think the challenge in my mind is people don't trust that it's anonymous.
Yeah, and I think that they have reason to trust it. It's interesting. I was asking you a question to which I don't know my own answer, so I'm going to think out loud. I am hyper-American, so I don't think people should be forced to do it. But I do think that I think it would be very wise of governments to incentivize giving your data in a way that is anonymized. The government is going to have to earn trust with that because, good Lord, I really don't think they've done a great job of earning people's trust. But that would be where I would want to lean. I would want to see people incentivized to give that information. I would want to see that information protected as fiercely as something can be protected. And look, I'll anticipate the comments in the feed saying I'm being naive. That is almost certainly true. But nonetheless, this to me feels extremely consequential. So I am a big believer that if we can live forever, we should. It's very interesting. I'm going to make that statement for now, and then we can challenge it. But I really want to live forever. I will say that I can say with confidence. I really want to live forever. I do not see any way to get there without AI and an obscene amount of data. Given my proclivities for personal freedom, I don't see a way to get there other than to incentivize people to give up that data. Even though I know my data will be breached, if I'm honest, I would give it up if that meant I could be a beneficiary of that information.
Well, let me give you an example when you voluntarily give up that data. If you want to buy a life insurance policy today, for which you see a perceived benefit for your loved ones, usually the reason we buy life insurance policy, you give up your medical record. You go to a doctor, you get a physical exam, and you disclose your life habits and all the rest of it. That's expected, and people do it. Most people who have or buying a life insurance policy, expect that that's going to happen. If it's provided by your employer, you get a limited life insurance policy, then you don't. But everything else you buy. We're used to seeing that. And I look at that analogy and I say that's a choice people who buy policies make, and they clearly have a value from that. Can we learn from that behavior? That's one-to-one benefit. But now you're talking about getting a population. But let me give you an interesting dilemma in the aging field. Remember we talked about how to measure your age, your biological age. If I give you, I'll buy a life insurance policy, I use a date of birth. If I get a job, I provide my date of birth, and my age is taken into account in terms of my employability, not from discrimination, but retirement age. And employers look at, how many years can we expect this person to work, all the rest of it. Let's say I could tell you that you are 10 years older than your birth certificate. Should you be required to disclose that to your life insurance policy? Should they take that into account? Is that part of the actuarial equation? Should your employer know what your biological age is? It certainly affects your employability, certainly affects the actuarial tables. So we're going to be actually facing these questions in the not too distant future. So what you're raising is absolutely hypothetical true. I'm just saying it's going to become a practical reality in specific applications that we haven't anticipated yet. But just imagine the day I can tell you that you're aging 20 years faster than your peer. Should you disclose that to your family? Should that affect your choices that you're making for your children? Should it affect whether you should have children or not? There's going to be questions that technology is about to unlock, enabled by big data and all the rest of it, that we haven't even started thinking about.
Yeah, this is where it gets very interesting. So I will ask the audience to forgive me if I change my mind down the line, because I am definitely thinking about this for the first time. But here's how I would approach that. I would certainly want to know that information. I absolutely would not want my employer, if I wasn't my own employer, I would not want them to know that because it becomes far too easy to black hole somebody in that, I just don't like that data point. And so now it becomes impossible for somebody to get a job. For instance, my dad, as he was nearing retirement age, dyed his hair because he was completely gray. He dyed his hair when he went on a job hunt. And I said, yeah, that's a smart idea. Because it subconsciously gives the cue of youthfulness and vitality. And I think positioning yourself with the full recognition of how you will be perceived is very wise. And so there is just a truth that I think we want as the individual. We want as much control over people's perception of us as possible. And especially if they hold some sort of consequential sway over you. However, when it comes to life insurance, I'm asking you to take a bet on me. And the more that we can get to an actuarial certainty, I think that's more fair. So from a life insurance perspective, I do think that that is worthy of them or worthy for them to require that. And at my previous company, we took out keyman insurance on me. For people that don't know what that is, it's the assumption that if something happened to you, that would have a material impact on the company. And so the company will sometimes take policies out on a small handful of people. And so I had keyman insurance on me, and I did not enjoy that process. That I felt like a piece of meat. But at the same time, I was like, hey, I'm asking them to pay out millions of dollars. If I were to die. And so I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. To your point, these are things that we are going to have to suss out. And I think that people are going to need to start forming opinions about this stuff. And people are going to have to, going back to that idea of societal norms, we are going to have to start making decisions about what this stuff means and getting this propagated out there as quickly as possible. So now let's really get gross for a second.
Okay.
This might go back to what you were saying about you took exception to Peter Attia ranking type 2 diabetes, or maybe it was the way I positioned it. So I'm not speaking for Peter Attia. I will speak for
Peter's
myself.
a friend, colleague,
Amazing
highly
human
respected.
being. I love that guy more than you know. But the reality is type 2 diabetes, according to Tom Bilyeu, is a lifestyle choice. People are choosing to have type 2 diabetes. And if they let me control what they eat, they won't have type 2 diabetes. And so I do think that there are certain things that are within people's control. And if you are doing a self-inflicted wound like smoking, that I will say, yeah, you are going to get put into a bad category of life insurance, of a whole host of things. Your health insurance should be more expensive if you smoke. But by my standards, it should also be more expensive if you can't modulate your blood sugar appropriately. What say you?
So I grew up and got trained in endocrinology, and specifically actually diabetes and metabolic disease, from the school of thought that advocated exactly what you said. That's how I was trained, that's how I practiced, and that's how I taught. I was an academic center, actually all my practicing career. So if I reflect back, and if some of my students and former students are listening, they'll say, well, that's Dr. Khan, that's exactly what you were advocating. What's caused me to question that? Do I have evidence to counter what you've just said? Indirect. You mentioned the GLP-1 agonists, right? GLP-1 agonists on the surface cut your appetite and therefore you make better choices. As a neurophysiologist, biologist, which I'm not a neurophysiologist, but if you ask the neurophysiologists, they raised a much broader question. It actually does more than that. It changes the whole gut-incretin communication. The biology changes. That's one line of evidence that suggests this is more than just cutting the appetite. It's changing our metabolism. And so it becomes this chicken and the egg question: is the diabetes-prone person making bad choices, making them diabetic? Or is it that underlying biology that becomes this vicious cycle? I think this last round of therapeutic interventions has really raised questions in the minds of endocrinologists.
Let me ask you a pointed question, because you might know something I don't, but I doubt it. If you let me control what somebody eats, can we agree that if you give me 100 diabetic patients, and remember, I control what they eat, they're locked in a room, they can't touch food that I don't give them, that I can get 100% of them to no longer be a diabetic?
I can say, look, there's no question. When I used to teach this philosophy, I used to say, if you go to a refugee camp, or you go to any mass gathering crisis after a war, or wherever people are now hungry, you will, over time, find no patients with type 2 diabetes. Just about. That tells you is, if you force human behavior to an extreme environment, lock them up in a room, of course, their biology will reset. That doesn't mean to say that their underlying biology is normalized, because the minute they're out of that environment, they rebound. Okay? That's one. The second is, I'm just going to add another variable, which I find fascinating, outside my area of expertise, fascinating, is the whole understanding, or greater understanding, of our microbiome. We know, if you take certainly animal experiments, and this is maturing rapidly, you can take an overweight animal, transplant those bacteria into an underweight animal, and the underweight animal metabolism has changed, and vice versa. In fact, force-feeding experiments are even more exciting, because you take a thin animal's microbiome, put them in another animal, and try to force-feed it, still won't gain weight. And so, is that choice? Because there you're force-feeding it, which is sort of the, hey, I'm eating even though I don't need to. And if you put these different pieces of evidence together, it starts to raise the question, where is the distinction between choice and biology of the underlying itself? I don't think it's that black and white anymore. And I've been really self-reflecting and asking myself, were all the assumptions and the norms that I accepted actually now being challenged? It's no different than the discussion we've had around aging. What is inevitable versus what is the underlying biology and the environment? Now, the microbiome I find even more fascinating, and simply because it then raises questions around even the environment we live in. Okay, we have, as modern humans, changed our environment in dramatic ways. Many have had powerful public health impact. But was there a price? What's the consequence, and how do you mitigate? What are we learning from that? So I hope, if nothing else, to achieve from this, to raise a seedling of a doubt to maybe we don't have the answer that black and white.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in free will?
Free will as a person living in the free world saying, I'm deciding what I want to do?
Yes.
Not 100%.
So I will confess something, which my audience will have heard multiple times. I don't believe in free will. So
then we're agreeing.
Well, I'm maybe even more hardcore. Free will is an illusion. But I don't think there's any way to live your life other than as if you had free will. And so every argument that I make, oh God, this really gets complicated very quickly. But here's how I look at this. Free will is an illusion. However, humans still change. So the question then becomes, if we don't have free will, but we are changeable, now what? And so I think of myself quietly. I don't talk about this out loud very often because it just will drive people to distraction. But I think of myself as an algorithm. I cannot help but say the things that I'm saying right now because of all my genetics, my microbiome, all the things I've encountered, all the N of one things about me. But because of that, I am compelled to put certain ideas out into the world. Now, the reason I think that's incredibly powerful, and the notion, or not even the notion, the sense of compulsion I have to put certain ideas out into the world are because I know that even though I don't have free will and the people listening to this don't have free will, they will still be changed by these ideas. So it becomes a question of what ideas do we put out into the world, knowing that all of us lacking free will are going to be shaped by the ideas that we encounter. Because I think it only makes sense to act as if you had free will, then it's like, okay, acting as if you had free will, what are the ideas that are going to shape people in the direction that makes the most sense to shape them into? Now, that requires you to have a North Star. There has to be something that you're aiming at. You are the right person to have this conversation with, because I've heard you say 1,000 times that a leader's job is to give people vision. You have to know what it is that people should be aiming at. So I believe people should be aiming to maximize human flourishing, to minimize human suffering. We can get into what human flourishing means, but basically to thrive, to not be in emotional or psychic pain, to uplift not only yourself, but other people. Because if you're a sociopath and you get joy out of punishing others, that does not qualify in my book. You have to be elevating other people as well. So the reason that I harp on choice, even though I don't think we have free will, the reason that I say that being a type 2 diabetic is a choice is because that idea is going to influence that person's behavior. And if they believe, oh, it's just my underlying biology, there's nothing I can do, then they won't do the things they need to do to reverse that problem. You spoke earlier about you have to be able to show that this thing is the problem, this biomarker is the problem, and that I've done an intervention and I can measure that it moved me backwards in the right way. And without that, we're never going to make progress. So that's my whole thesis with whether it's weight loss, whether it's diabetes. I get it. It's way harder for some people. I come from a morbidly obese family. When you put me next to my wife, we can eat calorie for calorie, the exact same thing. I will put on fat. You will literally hear me getting fatter as I'm chewing. It's crazy. And my wife will just get very hot. So she'll sweat through her clothes, her sheets in the middle of the night. I won't, but I will put on fat. Cool. So we now both have a genetic predisposition for one way of dealing with excess calories. I put it on as adipose tissue. She uncouples heat. Great. Now I am very emotionally traumatized by the fact that my wife can eat basically whatever she wants and she doesn't get fat, and I do. But if I just lament that and I don't make different choices, then I will be resigned to be like the rest of my family and I will be morbidly obese. But instead, because I've encountered an idea that influences my behavior, which is that I'm in control of this, now I make different choices and I get a different life outcome. So I'm not sure people that fall into your camp, they tend to be very compassionate. And everything in my research tells me that you are very compassionate. But I don't know that it actually helps people to not say, hey, you're in control. Make a different decision, get a different outcome.
So let me challenge part of it.
Please.
You've using the framework of freedom of will and choice in related, but two, in my mind, distinct situations. One is you raised the question of the mechanism and etiology and causation of diabetes. And there, my response is, it is not all choice. There's clearly genetic predisposition. You take two obese individuals, the risk of diabetes is not the same, even though both are overweight. In fact, if you look at identical twin studies, the concordance of type 2 diabetes in identical twins is not 100%. Even though their BMI is the same, they're genetically clones, they're not 100%. And you could argue they've grown up in the same environment, their behavior is nothing. So there's clearly biological difference. We know that from twin studies. So all of that suggests that the etiological discussion, causative discussion, is not a black and white choice or not. You've raised now a very different question, which is if you're going to help somebody intervene who already is on the trajectory to diabetes or has become diabetic, as a clinician, do you tell them and say, listen, this is not this is not your fault, it's choices? Absolutely not. That's not the two different situations and two different arguments. There you absolutely would say, if you do the following, this will improve your situation. And it's never, as a clinician now treating patients with diabetes for many, many years, it was about, you're going to see improvement. Now, some patients made dramatic change. It was absolutely clear that they changed their life. We've seen obese people completely normalize their BMI. Something triggered it, got them going. Others did and then relapsed, while others made no change, continued to progress. So it's a spectrum. And so as a clinician, absolutely, you start with improving what you can, and then you sort of say, whatever doesn't work, now what else do I have as an option? And that's an interventional approach, which is different than understanding the underlying causative mechanism scientifically. I hope that's clear. You have to put two different minds on when you're a researcher versus a clinician. Not the same. Now, the other thing that we have to ask ourselves is that as we go forward, what is it that we need to unravel in order to help more and more, a higher percentage of these people? You earlier mentioned about sensors. There's going to be some people who just basically, you give them a diet prescription and exercise, and they change their life. There's others who need a feedback loop. And that feedback loop might be weighing themselves. Feedback loop might be the sensor. There may be another feedback loop. Maybe there's a subconscious feedback loop, not just a conscious one, that continues a neurological signal, hypothetically, that continues to change their behavior. It's a self. Because when you make a conscious decision, I just saw my blood sugar go 300, I'm not going to eat that cake. That's a feedback loop. But what if the feedback loop isn't that conscious? So I'm just raising, those are all things that are technologically more and more possible. We're all hearing about neurostimulation of our autonomic nervous system. So you, given how impressively, and I mean this, you've read, those are on the horizon too. We're starting to see neuromodulation of the autonomic nervous system through non-invasive stimulation, sound, this, that, and the other. Is that, if that's a feedback loop, is that a conscious? Is that a behavior change? Free will? Do you understand where I'm going? So we can't close the door on that. And all of a sudden, you're going to do a lot of public good potentially if you can unravel that.
So I think we agree wholeheartedly. So one, I've said many times, I want my tombstone to read, "You're having a biological experience." The reason I'm trying to get people to understand that is everything in your life, everything is mitigated by your biology. So whether that is my wife being able to eat more calories than I can without putting on fat because she turns it into heat energy, whereas I turn it into adipose tissue, or something completely different, that's irrelevant to me. You as an N of one, you are a certain way. Your brain works a certain way, your body works a certain way, your gut works a certain way. It's going to be slightly different than all of your other humans. You need to make sure that you tailor something exactly to you. But the reality is that if you act as if everything were a choice, you're going to be in a much better position. So I need to do something different to maintain my physique than my wife does. However, we both still have to do a thing to maintain our physique. And once you let yourself off the hook and you say, "Oh, well, I'm just born to be fat," right? Again, coming from a morbidly obese family, the number of times I've heard that, like, "Oh, they used to say this to me all the time when I was a kid. You're going to get fat too when you get older. You're going to get fat too. You're going to get fat too. You're going to get fat too." And so in my early 20s, when I started getting fat, I was like, well, I guess this is that. Like, this is the moment everybody warned me about. And then I realized that you can't eat an entire tub of licorice and not get fat. And I just I had many misconceptions about sugar primarily, did not understand how it could become body fat. That did not make any sense to me. And so when I said, okay, hold on, my life is an exact reflection of my choices. If I want a different life, I need to make different choices. All of a sudden, even though my biology is different, even though I may need a different feedback loop than somebody else, even though something may be harder for me than somebody else, the reality is everything I do has this will be interesting to see how you respond to this. It has a knowable outcome. Not that we know it yet, because I don't think that we can parse the data yet. This is why I'm obsessed with AI, is it is the promise of being able to find the patterns in an overwhelming avalanche of data. And right now, we all just get paralyzed because there is so much data, and we treat it as if it is not knowable. And what I'm saying is, this is knowable. Human biology is knowable. That we live in a determined universe. That if I had the processing power to understand the beginning state of the universe, I could move forward or backwards. And I think it is only that we don't yet have the processing power to track all those complex interactions. Now, I've heard that refuted, that once you get into, I think it's known as the 3-body problem. Once you have that third variable, there's just too much complexity. But when I hear that, I just say, we just don't have the ability to track the amount of complexity yet.
So look, I have no doubt in my mind that as computational capability and the power of processing, structuring, processing data, etc., continues to go up, and I think it'll continue almost exponentially. We're seeing that, we've witnessed it. It's going to unlock connections and associations in data that we never imagined. One word of caution. Go back to 20-some years ago when the Human Genome Project was completed and the human genome had been sequenced. A lot of people celebrated. Said, now we will be able to identify every cause of disease because we know the human genome. The 2 flaws in that. One is we hadn't sequenced the whole genome. So because at that time, the computational power capability was such that anything then smaller than about 100 base pairs or so, I'm going off memory now, was considered noise. So we actually only sequenced part of the human genome. We just didn't have the computer capability to really sequence everything. Too much noise. Move forward, we eventually did, more recently, complete the Human Genome Project because we sequenced everything. The second is we had assumed that one gene sequence equaled one protein. And then we realized that there were more proteins than gene sequences. So there was clearly an amplification of that variability after the genome had been transcribed, the data code read into what the protein. So there was even more variability, multiple, several-fold. And then we realized that protein function was even further amplified in variability because of the so-called epigenome. And so every time data has unlocked our understanding of this variability, which is what you're getting at, we've realized it's actually given us a window into how 1 billion years of evolution has created diversity, not just through DNA sequence or now the types of RNA, but all of these other things are happening. What do I mean by that? We will unlock more of what is in the biological data set, so it now becomes known, but it will also very likely open up new frontiers, which has happened every time because we have more precision in our tools to understand another level of variability, which is important. It's absolutely important. But I'm not of the school of thought to say now, given if we just take our existing data sets, suddenly have the computational power, this will give us all the answers. It will give a lot more answers, and it will raise questions so that we can continue to answer them and add more and more precision to our understanding. It's not going to be that simple. We've been through this already in 2 waves that I just gave you examples of. They actually allowed us to get to the next level of depth. Likely that's what's going to happen now. I may be wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong. But history tells us this is likely to be the case. Now, should we be doing this? Absolutely, for the reasons that I just said. My job as a leader, you quoted some of the things I've said as setting the vision, is to help my organization and hopefully parts of the field put aside for a minute that noise, that complexity, and try and bring simplicity to what the first step in getting to that goal is, so that we harness and focus resource. Because progress is made through different organizations, in a somewhat coordinated way, taking on pieces of the puzzle and then bringing those pieces together, right? We need to be very clear as leaders, what does the end game look like? What are we trying to do, and what's the first step to that?
How do you do that? How do you take an incredibly complicated topic and boil it down to the first step?
I always ask my team 3 fairly straightforward questions, right? We all know what our vision is, right? We want to expand healthy lifespan for the benefit of all. Simple, powerful statement. We help craft it. Health, span, benefit of all. Okay? So if we look at that as our sort of guiding North Star, then we can say, we got to focus on health span, not just health and disease, but health that's linked to lifespan. And we got to be able to democratize this so that it has scale and impact. So if you put that filter on, you say, all right, of all the things we could be doing, the first filter is this really in the health span space? And can it really be democratized either because of in technology or because of moral reasons, right? You've read the possibility of taking plasma from young people and transfusing it to old people to rejuvenate. I can't ever envision approving in my organization that type of practice simply because I don't know how to scale it. Ethically, morally, commercially, you take your pick. So it's not scalable. But if we could understand what the circulating factor in young plasma is that rejuvenates a combination of peptides, whatever they are, and now manufacture them, that's scalable. So it's really understanding the scalability and the path to scalability, and then asking ourselves, what is our right to succeed? I don't like to use the word which I use in when I was in corporate life, where it was much more appropriate, I don't like to use the term right to win. Because right to win is a very competitive mindset, which when you're in a corporation, in a business, is your job, right? You're winning market share, you're growing your market share, you're leading, winning the industry, whatever, right? When you're trying to lead a field, convene the best minds, convene the different disciplines, and lead and make this into a movement, you shouldn't be talking about winning. You should be talking about leading. Not the same thing. Sometimes our leaders talk about being winners. I don't agree. In fact, I gave a speech in Washington where I said the challenge we now have as leaders of a country is we're starting to talk about winners versus losers, when we really should be talking about our history has been about leading the world and elevating everybody. Think about, we're both Americans. How did we see democratization of US inventions? Agriculture, transport, communications, entertainment, internet, GPS, cellular phone technology, all got democratized. And we grew, the world grew. It was leading, wasn't just winning. So as a leader, how do I motivate my people? I say, let's talk about leading this field. What is our right to lead? And what is our right to succeed as a leader? So the leadership, I hope, is clear. Now the question is, what does success look like? And that's where the roadmap comes in. What's the first step in that journey to that vision? If I just say that is the end point and that's it, it is so daunting. Most people will not take it on. Probably the biggest role I have as a CEO, and you have as a CEO, is finding the best, brightest minds, those young people, to come join you in sharing that vision. They can always get a job. Question really I always ask myself is, why would they work in my organization on our challenges versus another? Why is this their choice? You don't want the people who just coming because they need the job. You want the people who have 10 choices, but they choose to follow you. And you've heard me say this, leadership is not a choice by the leader. Leadership is a choice that their followers make. So how do I make it their choice? That's where I give them a stretch goal, but something they can perceive is within reach. And that's, I think, is the job of leaders. Clear on the vision, and then point out, here's the first step. If you achieve this, you will gather the momentum to go. And by the way, attract many others to come. And that's the right to lead. Can you attract? Can you bring people together? If you think about this meeting, one of the things that we're seeing as we're starting to launch this meeting is the meeting of a typical aging geoscience gathering. It's about 150, 200 people in the core biology of aging and investing in the aging space. We've had 1,800 people register for this meeting. That's a log scale more. I can't take the credit for that. That's my team's job, and they don't get all the credit. The demand must have been out there. What was missing in that void was the leadership role of catalyzing everybody to come together. That's where the leadership and the right to lead. If we actually bring together 1,000, 2,000 people at the same venue, talking about the same issue from its different perspectives, you have got the right to lead, but others did it for you.
It's very interesting. I am of two minds of that. So I will point out, dear listeners, that we are speaking to the former member of the Commission on Competitiveness or something like that. So
the U.S. Council for Competitiveness.
There we go. So I know in your past is a real understanding and recognition of the power of competition. Going back to the idea you're having a biological experience, humans are designed to be competitive. We are hardwired to other somebody else and to want to win, to put it in a nice way, against that person. And I'm a big believer, don't try to change behavior, try to leverage it. Try to figure out what people are already doing and how do you hijack that neuron. So I know that people want to win. I know that people are going to look at some people as in-group and some people as out-group, and how do I leverage that? So one of my tools as a leader is, hey, we want to win. Like we want to be the best YouTube channel on the planet. We want to make the best video games as judged by who plays the most, views the most, whatever. Like I want to win. Now I want to do it in a healthy way. I don't want to look at my the people that I'm competing against as anything other than a worthy opponent. That's a big thing for me. I want to go up against people that are worthy, people that I want to see them on their best day, but I want to win. I want to beat them. I want to go head to head and I want to outperform them. Now, if I don't, like, I don't know if you remember Nancy Kerrigan, but I don't want to go hit somebody in their knee so that I can beat them. That is not interesting to me. I want them to thrive. It's so funny. I've never talked about this, but I had somebody reach out to me back channel about one of the biggest podcasters in the space. You haven't even heard this. And they were just lamenting like, oh, this person's trash. Like, why are they getting so many accolades? They're this, they're that. And that's not interesting to me. I'm like, they're better than me right now. I want to believe that I can outperform them on a long enough timeline, but they are currently better than me, which is why they're getting more results than me. And that lights me up. Like I'm on fire for that. And I wonder, because look, I love that Hevolution is in a very unique position in that you guys exist by royal order, not even royal decree or whatever the slightly lower version, royal order. You guys are going to do this. This is like a mandate from the king himself. Cool, love that. And so you guys don't have some of the pressures. But the human animal, like if you told me you need to go solve XYZ problem, what do you need to make it happen? I'm like, oh, find a way to make the people that win at that rich, and people will do it. I'm not saying that that's good. I'm just saying it is. It is true. And people want to claw their way to the top. The best, the brightest, the most aggressive, they want to win. And do you think that, one, you've had a ton of success in your life, and so it's much easier for you at this point. You've not only do you have financial success, corporate success, it looks awesome on paper. You also have marriage success, kids, grandkids, like you've really got the thing. And you've managed to align yourself with people that don't need a financial return. But do you think that that is a scalable model? Or am I positioned in a more scalable solution where I'm like, yeah, just find a way to help people get rich and the human tendencies will take over?
You have, I think you've made some very profound statements, many of which I would not argue with, but I want to give them a slightly nuanced context. By the way, the only good decision I've really ever made was married the right woman 41 years ago.
Smart.
Everything else you just stated about my career and personal life is 90% hers, and the rest I sort of came along on the journey. So let's just put that on the record. There's very good scientific evidence that our motivations clearly change through our life stages. There's no question. When we're teenagers, in our 20s, we're very self-focused. That's natural. Why? Because as a species, as a young person, you're trying to find your place in the world. You want a voice. You want to be heard. But there's also very clear evidence that if you want to look at social impact, giving forward, all those things, that happens much later in your life, A, because you have the capacity, but also because your thinking starts to become much more nuanced. The gray areas, what was black and white, when you're a young teenager, early 20s, things are much more black and white. It's the classic saying, you know more about a topic when you've read the textbook than versus when you wrote it, okay? Having been both a reader and a writer, I really knew far less after I'd written the textbook chapter than when I was a reader. You learn your limitations. So I think we've got to take that first of all.
I want to make sure people understand what you're actually saying, because you were talking about this earlier, that as the island of your knowledge grows, so grows the shore of your ignorance. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which has been on full display, by the way, because I know less about this topic, I am far more bold in my predictions and my assessment of what the future is going to be. You know just enough to feel like you know everything, and you don't know so much that you realize, oh my gosh, I know nothing about this topic. Yeah.
Well, so I felt it personally. My son was a graduate school of business at Yale. Every class he'd come back and tell me all the things I was doing wrong as a CEO. That was his latest management class. Wow. Okay, thank you, son. Got it. Next time I teach in your class, I'll make sure we come. That's normal, okay? So that's one thing. Put that in context. The other is competition is good. The desire to win ethically, morally, just like you pointed out, it isn't at the negative consequence of somebody else. That's good. But it's a tool. We know from, let's say, competitive prizes, even in the technical field, right? Prizes like the SpaceX prize, which was sort of the publicly well-known prize, not only achieved technical success, but launched 3 or 4 very valuable companies by the participants in the race to be the first. It's not bad. Our whole IP patent process incentivizes competition to be the first because you reap the greatest benefit from that return. Our whole IP structure in the Western developed world is based on that. I'm not saying competition is bad, but I'm saying it's not the only tool. It is a tool in the armamentarium to bring forward and have social and public and better humanity. Think about which scientist in recent memory has had probably saved more lives than any scientist to come. If you think about it in life sciences, it's a Nobel laureate called Norman Borlaug. Never made any money, he wasn't in a competition, but he was the plant biologist that invented dwarf wheat. That dwarf wheat, funded by the US public health investment. He was coming out of the Department of Agriculture and through government tax, non-patented research, develops dwarf wheat, most of the benefit for which was in South Asia because they went from 1 wheat crop a year to 2. As a result, a minimum of 1 billion people were saved from starvation. Think of that. And so 1 billion lives saved, not diseases treated. I can't think of very many drugs that have ever done that, if any. And so was that by competition? No. The competitiveness there was to win and succeed to unlock a natural capability, because it was natural breeding. He wasn't doing GM, or he actually created that breed. So I give you that example to say massive good can happen at scale through collaboration. Now you use the word leverage. I love that word. But I give leverage another context in addition to what you're saying. Leverage, in my mind, allows you to do things primarily in 2, maybe 3 things. First, it results. Leverage results primarily from collaboration. When you collaborate, you get leverage. When you collaborate, that leverage allows you to have scale that you as an individual couldn't, and that scale allows you to get impact at a level that otherwise not possible. So leverage is one of those ways, and so competition is one lever. But on its own is rarely enough. Take the SpaceX prize. Somebody got through. Did everybody suddenly start going to space? No. Now you attracted capital, entrepreneurs, material scientists, people unlocked other things, and now you're starting to see commercialization. New countries are entering the competition for space, but it took somebody to prove it in a competition. On its own, it wouldn't go any further. Think of any competition. Think of, I gave you the example of cellular phones. Competition brought the private sector to give you cellular phone technology. They didn't invent it. The invention came from the US National Lab System that actually created the underlying technology. Same with GPS. Geolocation is happening because of that. So it's that public-private partnership. When we think about as a private sector, we forget all of that which was actually in the non-quote general competitive space. The COVID vaccine, everybody says, the private sector in 12 months gave us a vaccine. No, it was 10 years minimum of investment by the US taxpayer, primarily, in academic centers and the government labs to give you the underlying technology that could be rapidly applied. That was the competitive part. But you forget the other 90%, which is not competitive. Without that, there was no competition. So I just give you that it's important as leaders that when we think about competitiveness, we put it in the framework of what it will take, well, not just one piece.
Well said. Okay, we've been talking a lot about extending people's lives. Why? What is a life well lived? What should people be doing with all this extra time you're going to give them?
I think that that's going to be coming back to people being able to do based on the choices they want to make. The loss of functionality and the decline in health results mostly in a person's inability to do the things that they choose to do. They make compromises. They may want to do things that they no longer can simply because of a decline in their health. A pilot who's flying gets grounded because their vision does not have the same acuity that they had when they're 30. They lose their medical. In a time when we probably need 3 times as many pilots in the US, could say the same for air traffic control. I'm just giving an example of an industry that's massively short right now in training. That's why so many flights are canceled, because they don't have crew. Why? Because we ground the pilots. At a certain age, they don't pass their physical anymore, they're done. Loss of visual acuity is not a choice. That's an aging process. Being able to maintain that allows them to choose to continue to flying or retire. Most pilots that I know, and I happen to be a pilot, actually will tell you they don't want to ground themselves. They enjoy it. They want to continue to contribute. It took decades of experience to learn. They're grounded. So I can give you lots of examples. A surgeon who no longer has the manual dexterity, but has amazing intellectual experience, 40 years of experience, knowing not only how to operate, but when to operate.
Well, what's the takeaway? That contribution is a life well lived?
It's a choice. Contribution in the examples I've given you is professional. Another might be contribution because I want to be around to teach my grandchildren things about their heritage, my values as their grandfather, the society they live in is contribution. Being able to support, not just financially, enabling my children to do things because I'm around to be able to do things with my grandchildren is a contribution. I remember my son coming to me and saying, Dad, actually it was my son-in-law, sorry, Dad, your grandson just went through a health and human biology class in school, and they have to talk about human health and reproduction. I think he needs to have a talk with you. I said, when was I the designated? Oh no, I think you do it best. And off we went for a walk. I would think that's a very important contribution. Probably took it in my family situation in a better context, taking it from their grandpa than their parent. I play a role in their life. It's a cherished role. So that's contribution. I've given you 2 ends of the spectrum. Both are important. If I didn't have children, I could be mentoring other young people. I do mentor young people who are no longer employees of mine, but I'm still their mentor. Being able to do that is very fulfilling for me. It's nothing to do with monetary return, and they're not doing it because they work for me.
Have you read Man's Search for Meaning?
No.
Whoa! I think you will love it the most. It is one of the most influential books on me that I've ever read, written by Viktor Frankl, survived the Holocaust. And he talked about how basically you have to find meaning and purpose. And it's sort of the Nietzschean line of he who has a strong enough why can survive almost any how. It's that same idea. And I think it's very much tied to contribution. When I think a lot about fulfillment, which for me is the ultimate point, I don't think that life intrinsically has meaning. I think we all give it meaning. But I think, to your point, we've had 1 billion years of evolution. You are hardwired to pursue what I call fulfillment. As far as I can tell, fulfillment has a recipe, and that recipe is that you have to work very hard to gain a set of skills that you care about, that allow you to serve not only yourself, but other people. And as much as I want to get away from that need to serve other people, I really do think that that is intrinsic. The one thing I think I would really struggle with is if I were alone on a deserted island or I was the last human. I like to think that I would still be able to emotionally thrive, but I don't know. That's the one thing where if I didn't have another person to be able to do something for, it'd be tough. I think a lot about my life and why, because I'm a very solitary person, but I'm nested within the context of a very happy marriage. And a business for that matter. So while I don't pursue a lot of like friendships and go hang out with the boys, and I just don't do any of that, my cockiness around my ability to be alone is still nested inside of a deep sense of, the word that comes to mind is obligation, but in a positive way, where there are all these people that I need to help and do things for and show up for and be strong for. And I think without that, it would get dark very fast.
So you've just stated that, like most vast majority of people, you're human. Here's why I say that. To my knowledge, and there may be an exception that I haven't come across, many animals teach the next generation. All of them teach where the next generation emulates what the parent does. It's mimicking, and eventually, by repetitive mimicking, they pick up how to do something. And that's how knowledge is passed. And so if the adult chimpanzee cracks a nut in a certain way, the baby keeps doing it one way or another, and eventually figures out that there's a certain way that it's done, and it's figured out. Humans are the only ones that I know of that actively teach. And through that active teaching, they instruct. That instruction is hardwired into us as a human species. It's very unique about being human. It is not simply, we don't learn passively, we learn through instructions. That's a human attribute. And what you're doing today is contributing to that active teaching of a very large following. So I would challenge your term of you are, quote, a very individual, whatever way you want to put it, because not only is the marriage, but you actually have an extended sphere of active influence through your current role, through the businesses you've built, and even the nutrition business, food business you built, was in part to change and actively change and impart certain enabled behaviors on your customers or consumers. That's what makes us human. That is very much the part of where almost all of us are wired. So there's some attributes, and sometimes we forget. We're actually the only active teachers in nature.
Let me ask, if we could live forever, should we?
I don't know whether we should or not. I honestly don't know. However, it's the same as saying, should we treat any biological process? In my mind, I come back to being a physician. I want to alleviate suffering. I want to prevent suffering. Aging causes probably more suffering than any condition I know, even more so than hunger. Just look at the numbers. And so if we can alleviate that and allow positive contribution to society, I'm modest enough, ambitious enough to push that envelope, but modest enough to say, I don't know beyond that. What else might be possible? I'm a strong believer in, that's more of a moral question. And so scientists shouldn't drive the definition of morality. In fact, one of the first things I did when we launched Evolution, remember we had 2 employees, is I asked our number 3 employee of the team to put together an expert advisory panel of bioethicists. First thing I did. I was fortunate with a longstanding friend who's professor at NYU, Professor Arthur Kaplan, to agree to chairing that. He's one of the foremost thinkers in the world in this space, not a biologist, but he's a bioethicist. And we approached him and said, would you put together? And we both approached Professor Julian at Oxford, who's the founding chair of bioethics, to join that. Then we approached somebody from Asia, the Middle East, and put together global bioethics to start to ask the question, where is bioethics on the areas that we're working in? Shouldn't be my job as the CEO to do that, and it shouldn't be a scientist's job to define that. I think this is where it's important to get the people who are thinking about these questions, including that should be guided by us. I'm very, very firm with the team. We should be looking at what we want to go, what the possibilities are. We should always be guided by where that line is. And remember, as you know, I know from your discussions, ethics is itself an evolving science. If I may use the term science, you can use the word discipline. It evolves. It evolves with society, it evolves with knowledge. And evolves because the questions being posed 20 years ago, well, I said 50 years ago, cancer was incurable. And so there was never an ethical question of, should you cure cancer? We had no choice. Now, it raises a different question. By the way, cancer is very relevant to aging. I just wanted to throw that in. Science has made amazing progress in curing childhood cancer. Most children who got leukemia died. Today, more than half, majority, will get cured. We have the drugs, we have the treatment. Lymphomas, young men getting lymphoma, young women getting lymphoma, in many cases are curable. That's a win. However, we now, 30 years of treatment of success, have realized that most survivors of cancer have accelerated aging. Their body ages faster than their peers who didn't get treated for cancer. So was it the underlying cancer's existence changing their biology? Were their underlying biology different, or was it a consequence of the treatment? We need to answer those questions now, which really will start to open a new frontier, not only in what causes aging, but when to intervene. Let's say we figured this out and we could prevent the future accelerated aging of a young person, teenager, young adult who's now being treated for cancer. Should we be intervening with, quote, I'm using the general term, anti-aging therapy right after they've recovered from their cancer to prevent that? Don't know yet, but we'd better start looking now, because we're going to have a lot of successes that now are living with that. There are some genetic diseases that we know cause aging. Down syndrome is an example. Accelerated aging. These children die as young adults. Their life expectancy is low. What is it about the genetic change of Downs that changes the aging process? It's a single chromosomal difference, right? So there are now going to be ethical questions. When do you intervene? Who should you intervene on? So I don't want to be the only one answering the question. It's a long answer to your question. I've thought about this extensively. And again, I'm at a point in my life and say, bring in the experts to help guide your thinking. Yes, I've got it as the CEO, I'm accountable for the decision at the end of the day, but it should not be in a totally top-down, hey, let me tell you what the answer is. I don't have the answer.
Has the bioethics team that you put together given you any warnings?
They have raised questions, right? I've given you an example of plasma transfusion, right?
Young blood.
Young blood.
Now,
Here's another
let me
one.
actually ask you about the young blood. I'm glad you brought that back up.
Yeah.
So I love the idea that somebody can monetize their body. And if somebody wanted to sell their blood, why does that bother you or a bioethicist?
Tell you why it bothers me. It comes back to your question of free will and choice. Okay? Science over the years has evolved. We lived through a period where through persecution, genocide, we were experimenting on humans that is atrocious. Go back to World War II. We then lived through a period where we were experimenting on African Americans without their consent, right? We were at some point incentivizing, paying volunteers to allow us to do research. If they're prisoners, they got extra privileges. That's a form of payment. Is that free will? Is that choice? Or is that coercion?
All of those were coercion.
Okay. Now, if you are a poor person living in an inner city and you get a financial incentive to sell your plasma as a young man, I'm picking man because
Sure.
we're both, to donate to somebody, it is quite possible, and the evidence suggests that the person selling their plasma is not of the same socioeconomic class as the person buying.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, is that coercion? Is that free will?
That sounds like free will to me. Why, if I can sell my time, why
Yes.
not my blood?
Selling your time, I think most bioethicists would argue, and I certainly am of that camp, is an employment where there's a general, here's a transparent value proposition for my time. When I'm selling a part, where do you draw the line? I've sold my plasma. Can you sell an organ?
No, because it's not replenishable.
Okay.
That would be where I draw the line.
Okay, so I don't know how much plasma I can take before I've done myself harm.
Okay.
I mean, let's take a look at this. The prevalence of iron deficiency, thin blood, in lower socioeconomic classes is much higher than higher socioeconomic classes. Are those the populations you want to be buying blood from, even if it's free will?
That's a different question. For me, the ethics of the situation come down not to scalability, which was prior to asking you that question, the pushback I'd always heard you give is it's not scalable. Some things just aren't going to be scalable. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to deny somebody the ability to monetize their time, energy, body, whatever, in the way that they want, if it is non-destructive. Because I get, if it were like, oh man, I can't make ends meet and I want to sell my kidney, I can see how that one can go gnarly pretty fast. And I would say I'm not a libertarian, so I'm not about like, hey, no regulation. Like, obviously, if we were going to do this, you would want it to be something that's regulated to make sure if there is a limit to what people can give before it starts being detrimental, that you draw those lines. But this is a very interesting moment that we're going to live through.
Sure.
Anytime you're living through a hyper transition, it's going to get weird really fast. And so as we figure out what works, what doesn't, it's going to be weird. There was a time where iPhones were basically only for the wealthy, but then you get very good at producing them and the cost begins to decline, though they're still pretty expensive. But cell phones get cheaper and cheaper. So if you look at this, if there isn't a way to monetize it in the beginning, like if we have to go from nothing to democratized with no intermediate step, I think it's going to be extremely difficult. The place where bioethics starts to scare me in terms of should we all live forever, going back to that question, is I think it was Max Planck that said, science does not advance one insight at a time, it advances one funeral at a time. You're having a biological experience. The mind works in a certain way. It is terrifying to me how hard it is for human beings to change. If I'm right, and we are all roughly the equivalent of 100 20-sided dice rolled, and whatever your 120 sides roll up, like that's just who you are and what you're going to be like. And obviously the permutations are in the billions or trillions. And so the big question for me becomes, all right, if I look at people that can't change like they're crazy because my 120-sided dice came up that I'm just hyper malleable, which feels very true. And I think my brain should be studied for science because I forget very easily in a way that I find distressing, that my wife wishes she had, but nonetheless may be the key to why I'm so malleable. I just don't get, my identity doesn't get caught up in weird things. Largely because I just don't hold on to them. Anyway, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse yet. It's just how my dice have rolled. And so to me, experientially, it does feel like humans can change a lot. But when I step back and look at people, I worry that Max Planck is right, that the only way to refresh a population, to keep things moving and to keep progressing, is for people to die off. Here's how I think evolution has shaped us, and this really worries me. We are the ultimate adaptation machine, but the way that we are created is such that you're hyper malleable at the beginning of your life and you become less so as you age. And you more or less sort of post 25 are very rigid. Not that you can't change, but you probably won't. And so functionally, it becomes effectively the same thing. And so because of that, even though we are this extremely adaptable creature, we do migrate out of the age of imprinting. We become effectively a static being. And so you need to refresh the population just by killing them off. And so even though like I really want to see if we can get to living forever, I'm also not sure that it's wise.
As I mentioned to you, and I think we're agreeing, I don't know if it's wise or not. But fortunately, right now, we don't have to answer that question to continue to do what we're doing, right? So it's what's the first few steps? We've got to make progress. Agree. Whether I agree on the notion that, you have to kill off in order to make progress, I don't agree with it as an absolute statement.
Because you have a more profound belief in our ability to change?
But societies continue to evolve, right? Does
because
that mean
people die?
I'm not sure. Their ideas don't die, they evolve. Do we live because we're physical beings, or we live because we leave ideas which continue to evolve themselves? But it's an evolution of those ideas, not a revolution. There's some things that challenge our norm, and eventually we look at these laws of physics are being challenged. Nothing wrong with that, but it's an evolution. I don't think it's a revolution of a complete replacement. There's updated versions of our ideology. But are we biologically any different today than we were as cavemen? There's no evidence for that. Yes, there's been some culling of the herd, but modern humans biologically are modern humans. But what has evolved has been our thinking, our morals, our values. Those have been multi-generationally been evolved. That's what makes us, I said, uniquely human. So I don't think it's just a replacement. And I distinguish between our physical presence on this world versus the ideas we leave behind, right? And our physical presence, yes, will have a finite time as far as we can tell. Will it be permanent? I don't know. Okay. However, let's ask ourselves that as we, this comes into the sort of our philosophy, how do we live on, even biologically? We are still, as humans, going to be living 5 generations from now because our DNA will be, our genetic code, right down to that fundamental level, your genetic code is still a derivative of your ancestors. Your germ cells are the oldest living cells from multiple generations, right? So we know that is happening. Depends on what you define as the unit. You're coming down to that level, you're coming down to the full society and culture level. Where do you want to draw the line of us living forever? I don't think it's that simple. And this is where we get into sort of the scientific debate of, life and the definitions. But me as a biological organism, being alive on this earth, contributing, we have been striving to that contribution ever since medicine came about. Nothing new about it. The day we figured out we could treat somebody with a fever and stop them from dying from a fever by giving them bark of a tree, we were preserving life. We were preserving functionality. Just using more precision and more powerful tools. It's just an evolution of that. A lot of people say to me, well, in our grandparents' generation, we never heard of cancer. Yeah, because the life expectancy was 50. Nobody lived long enough to get a cancer. Most cancers are age-related. Now that we're living long enough, we're getting those. So now we've uncovered challenges. Type 2 diabetes was almost unheard of, but at the same time, adults didn't live long enough to have diabetes. Weight gain was part of that too.
While age is certainly a factor in type 2 diabetes, I come back to my very strong conviction that you can track it to the increased amount of sugar that people eat. And probably
crack the
highly processed food.
ideology, but as I said, you define diabetes as hyperglycemia.
Yes. What do you define it as?
So how did we come up with the definition of diabetes at the, we define a cutoff about 118 milligrams per deciliter, right? It's an arbitrary definition. Doesn't mean, depending on who you look at, is 120, 118, is 116 not diabetes? Is 110 not diabetes?
The pre-diabetes stamp.
So now you're putting the pre, right? So you're picking your cutoffs. What we do know is if you look at the onset of diabetes, it's clearly age-related. It's not 100% weight-related. It's a difference in our body mass, lean body mass. It's a whole variety of things. Two individuals, I'm Asian, you're of Caucasian descent.
Mm-hmm.
My risk of getting type 2 diabetes at the same BMI is at least twice yours as we get into the higher BMIs. Why is it my genetic risk from obesity is far higher than yours?
Well, so
I'm making the same choices.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into it. And the great news is that you will know so much more about this. You can correct me where I go wrong.
And by the way, this is why the WHO has challenged the definition based on BMI of healthy body weight.
Well, so
in Asians versus
BMI.
Caucasians.
You're talking about the classification of obesity?
And ideal body weight.
Well, so ideal body weight is a very confounding issue. I'm talking specifically about the reason I think diabetes is something to pay attention to is I think sugar will, layman's terms, it will burn you alive from the inside out. You are going to glycate your tissues. It's going to get gummy. Your HA1C levels are effectively how much sugar is binding to your proteins. That the sugar binding to the proteins is a problem. And your cellular machinery will not work well because there is just a raw biological reality of what happens when there is an increased amount of sugar in the system, glucose in your bloodstream. You are now in the same way that a senescent cell makes it, what we know is that it's not working properly. What I know when somebody has the presence of too much glucose in their system is something breaks down. Now, whether that's a response to the level of insulin in your bloodstream, whether it's actually the sugar molecules binding up in your blood, I won't even speculate on that. I will just say it is self-evident that there is a causal relationship between the amount of glucose that I can break anyone, no matter how resistant you are, or no matter how good you are at handling an excess amount of sugar. I can break anybody if you let me give them enough sugar. So given that that is a very predictable way to break the cellular machinery, I'm just saying you're going to want to pay attention to that. And you can do this to a little kid. It might be harder to do to a little kid, but if you let me feed that kid like we feed a goose to get pate. Like it's just too predictable of an effect. Yeah. So that one to me is, and look, I have a feeling, look, if I were mapping your personality, I really have a strong instinct that you are hyper compassionate. And that if you put humans on a spectrum, I think any social creature has to have people that are hyper compassionate and has to have people that are hyper on the personal responsibility. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. But my thing is getting people to understand that you're not a bad person if you're a type 2 diabetic, even if it all was your choice. And we both acknowledge that it's going to be harder for some people than others. I think we also both acknowledge that free will is just an illusion anyway. But again, going back to you're changeable, and so the ideas matter. You're not a bad person if you're a type 2 diabetic. I want to be very clear about that. I don't pass any moral judgments. I'm a big believer that you cannot hate that which you love. I come from a morbidly obese family full of type 2 diabetics. I don't think they're bad people. I don't think they're less than a non-diabetic. I don't think it makes me better that I'm not a diabetic. But when my North Star is to alleviate human suffering, you want to talk about suffering? Make somebody a diabetic. Make them have to amputate their toes, then their foot, then their leg. Like that is a nightmare scenario. Also, just being inflamed all the time is nightmarish. And this is it is a solvable problem, and it's all controlled through diet. And I hope that people hear a message of hope in that, certainly not condemnation, certainly not you're a bad person, just, hey, there is a different choice you can make that will give you a different outcome. And that outcome is a better, as judged by suffering, life.
I think, as we talked earlier, I'm not disagreeing all the benefits of lifestyle choices. Absolutely agree. We came back to this question based on the fact that we gain weight as we age. What is irrefutable evidence that for the same body weight, different populations have different risks of getting diabetes. It's very clear. You look at body mass index, you look at total body, whichever variable, adjusted for height, because Asians on average have a lower height, in certain populations. The predisposition to diabetes clearly is different. If we look at populations with genetic disposition for diabetes, some populations have prevalences of over 50%. It raises the question, what is it about those populations that either they're all making bad choices, and in some cases, the risk is 60, 70% of their adults, or is it a combination of things? And I think as a scientist, one of the things that we must always do is question our assumptions to say, these exceptions to the rule may well be questioning the rule. That's where I'm going. Now, as you look at history, and I'm sure you've done that since you've read a lot about sugar, the last 50 years, we had two camps. We had the London, UK camp, which was a strong proponent of sugar as the bad culprit. We had two camps in the US, Minnesota and Boston. There were strong proponents of fat. Fat is the culprit. The fat camp won. The consequences of that was actually quite profound. We had a whole 2 to 3 decades of fat is bad. We had low-fat foods. We had, low cholesterol this. We had low that's low. And that fat was replaced in all of our supermarket foods with high starch, high fructose corn syrup. Everybody wanted a low-fat food because fat was bad. Okay? That came because of the argument being, now we can get into how food policy was changed and subsidies and what the drivers were. I have spent enough time in thinking about food policy in part of my life to really have dug into understand. It wasn't by surprise that the US became the industry driver of high fructose corn syrup. It wasn't by accident. Clear policy changes. Okay? Then, in the more recent past, we've seen a rebalancing. The sugar camp arguments have come forward, which is all the things you're espousing. No question. I've given careful thought in actually performing studies on how our body responds, all the way to quantifying, using radio tracers and radioactive labels, to in humans, to quantify what fraction of protein gets converted to sugar versus the different sugars. Stuff I've published. Given that collective, we do get a much better picture of what you're articulating is that. However, that itself, all of that on its own, doesn't leave you with the assumption of this all or none, it's one or the other. And all I'm saying is there's variability amongst us, and that variability results in different responses based on our underlying biology being different. There is not such thing in this context, metabolically, a prototypical single human being. That's one of the challenges in creating a digital, avatar human to do experiments on. It's likely going to be a digital twin, not a digital human. That's why. And it's not just in drug development, but understanding our biology. If you go back to a paper I published back in the 90s, when I was, young scientist, really got interested in saying, hey, if we eat a lot of protein, what happens to it? Why doesn't our blood sugar go up when we eat protein? Well, maybe it doesn't get converted to sugar until we quantified it. I published that paper. 60% of the protein, if I feed you, within 8 hours of consuming it, becomes sugar. 60% appears in your blood as sugar. And yet your blood sugar doesn't change. And yes, your insulin goes up. Why is that different? And then you start to understand it's not just the insulin and the sugar. The glucagon is different. The other hormones are different. And so it's the net of that. So that was the start of my career. I mean, I was supposed to be a classical physician and ended up trying to when I got to be a graduate student at the Department of Agriculture, most of my peers said, why are you going from the medical school to the agriculture school? I really wanted to understand this. So I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about this.
Speaking of things you've spent a fair amount of time thinking about, your company is going to need time to get the breakthroughs, create the innovations. What lifestyle do you want to see people live so that they're still around to take advantage of the breakthroughs that are coming?
I think, somebody asked me the same question in a different context, which I think is a very important question, which is, why aren't we investing more in public health, right? The challenge with public health, which I think is a powerful tool, is that there's a lot we know on what needs to be done, which would have an impact on individuals and populations. But the gap is the translating that knowledge into action. So we need to invest a lot more in translation of that knowledge. And the almost glib example I give is, if knowledge was the barrier, then doctors would never smoke. But we know many physicians, I personally know, that still smoke. Not because they don't know. Of course they know. I know cardiologists that smoke.
It's crazy.
They know, but they still smoke. So what is it? And understanding that gap between knowledge and behavior needs a lot of research and interventions. And so in the absence of that, so one thing is advocating for that. Absolutely. Another thing is figuring out and asking people to do what we already know. You and I, in some ways, I would use the word, are fortunate. We have BMIs, I'm just estimating, and I know my BMI, below 23, you're below 23. We're in the minority. And certainly in my age, I'm in my 60s, I'm in the minority with that BMI. And I'm being healthy in that BMI. Why am I different? I ask myself that question. Why am I different? What will it take for others to do? Because if others were doing all those things, then yes, I would answer your question. I just don't know how to get others to do that. I know what they need to do. You live it every day. I just don't know how to do it at a scale. How do we figure that? And I think we have way under-investigated in the translational public health science, and we need to support schools of public health. Just as we're supporting biology, we need to ask ourselves a question. I don't know the exact number, but it'd be interesting to find out. What percentage of US research funding goes to schools of public health versus other academic? It'd be an interesting question. My guess is a very significant minority. Yet, they've probably had the biggest impact on population health and within that, the sum of individuals, than probably any part of the medical school.
But knowing what you know, assume you're speaking to people that are willing to do what it takes. They are out there. What would you advise them to do? I'm guessing we're not smoking.
I've never smoked.
Not doing
That's
high
an easy
risk.
one.
So what should they be doing?
I think easy to state, but I'll state. Calories, limited to keep your BMI down. So that's the quantity side. I personally believe I eat everything. I eat everything. Chocolate cake, love it. Dessert, love it. Fried food, love it. However, infrequently, portion control, and if you're going to indulge in one meal, make it up for the other. I don't have a problem with indulgence. The question is the frequency, okay? And if you keep that in mind, quantity, enough gap between meals. You have a large meal, then skip a meal. And that's what I do. I have one main meal a day. I'm not intermittent fasting, that's the fad. Maybe I was intermittent fasting for years, but skip a meal. Regular activity. I have a standing desk in my office. Yeah, I can sit down. It's the luxury of being the CEO like you. Hey, guys, but I have a standing desk. I stand. I like to hold many of my one-on-one discussions with my executive directs standing up. They get used to it. They kind of come and talk to Mehmood about an issue. We're both going to stand up at my desk. It's this high, so they have no choice. They're going to sit and be underneath it. They're going to be standing. So they stand. After every meeting, I go take a walk of the office. Little things like that. Good sleep pattern. I go to bed early. I don't eat late. I usually have my dinner around 6 or 7 o'clock. Yes, I have a busy travel schedule. I'm typically on a flight every other week.
Ooh.
And they're not short flights. I'm going to the UK, to the US, to the Middle East, sometimes Asia, right? Long flights. I get off a plane. I look at my sleep pattern. I make sure I go for a walk out in the sunlight. Everything, nothing profound, but it's the sum of the little things that make up my lifestyle. I spend a lot of time whenever I'm around with my grandchildren. People ask me, how come you're so chilled out? You have a pretty busy lifestyle. The most calming thing I can do is have a conversation with my little grandchildren. Talk about it. One of the funniest things I heard my grandson, we were talking about space travel, and I told him in 1969, we had a school class assignment which was to watch the landing on the moon so we could write something about it. This was elementary school. And I was telling my grandson about this. A few weeks later, I heard him talking to his friend. He says, my grandpa was alive when they landed on the moon? This was like the most remarkable. I thought, now I feel old, right? But telling them that story is part of that. We immediately jump to things like, what can we eat to stay healthy? Part of all of our friendships, our circles, our family, that balance is part of us. It's what keeps us healthy. I think it's a strong effect on our blood pressure, on our stress levels. We have the tools, by the way, to measure stress. Biochemically, we can measure in your blood, we can measure in your vascular system, lots of tools. It raises a question to me as a clinician. I've got actually a team working on this. You were talking about feedback. I said, if you didn't have to worry about reimbursement, insurance or Medicare or UK NHS, whatever, if you didn't have to worry about it and you didn't have to worry about the cost of it, what are the best diagnostic tools we could bring to the table today that are available but not utilized because either they're not reimbursed or they're too expensive? And they're scientifically proven, but the cost of getting them to a regulatory I'm not talking about danger. I'm talking about just diagnostic tools. What would they be? And if they were applied to assess function relative to aging, how would you put, not one device, but the aggregate of it, what would that panel look like? I don't know the answer to that, but I've got a team actually working on that. Not because we want to create IP around it, but I want to bring the best minds from around the world. So we got ophthalmologists who's studying vasculature in the eye, cardiologists studying vasculature, musculoskeletal experts, biochemists, exercise physiologists, using all the tools that they do in their profession, but now to the clinic domain, put it under one roof, under one clinician, say, what does that protocol look like? If you could do that, and it's not going to take one specialty, because there is actually not a residency you can do in that specialty. Pioneers like Peter Attia, sort of a self-taught. But imagine now bringing all these disciplines in a formal training at that depth. That hasn't happened. What would that look like? You know what? That would be fascinating. If I could do that measurement on you today, I suspect you'd be curious. And if it could show, well, my eye vasculature is at this stage, my peripheral vasculature is this stage, my muscle biology is, my stress level in my endothelium is this level, you might want to know. That might change. So coming back to your question about what could people do, there's things they could do, but there's things we need to start thinking about doing to the profession so that those who choose, now we talked about democratizing, you're going to say, well, that's going to be really expensive. And yeah, you and I might be able to afford to do that, but what about the masses? Well, do you remember, well, I'm old enough, you may not be old enough. I remember when anti-lock brakes came to the market. You literally had to have a really expensive car because the first anti-lock brakes came on Formula One cars. And they were so expensive, it was never considered a technology to be democratized. Now the cheapest Asian car you can buy has anti-lock brakes just about. Okay? That was democratization of a very expensive technology. For the reason you were saying earlier where you were going, you need to have that test case of its potential in a limited market, and then another part of industry figures out how to scale it. Do the same on diagnostics. Now, one of the questions I'm curious, what is that anti-lock in the Formula One car equivalent? And there's lots of examples in Formula One that came. Inertial seat belts, this and the other, airbags. That could be democratized, but we need the investment to figure out what that prototype looks like. We haven't, up until we started these initiatives, it was really the domain of some very ultra-wealthy client clinics. We want to bridge that, figure it out, not to just create commercial scale of it and then figure out how to democratize it. But that we need to put to consumers. And I think there's a chunk of consumers, I don't like calling them patients. Patients implies they're coming to you for a disease therapy. They're consumers, just like we consume anything else. They're going to come forward and say, I want to know. If that now became part of your routine point of care assessment on an annual basis, I think the cost would come down. You could change behavior. I would want to know my stress level is at a much higher level than the average, and I can change it.
I know that feeling. This has been amazing. Where can people follow you online?
We update, I say we, because I have help supporting me to, I've never got up to speed how to do, but I love posting things on my LinkedIn page. We have a LinkedIn page for Hevolution itself through that, and podcasts like, leaders like yourself. You're right at the cutting edge of this. And then there's others who sort of, and I'm not trying to flatter you, but you yourself influence and then inspire others to do other versions of this. And you're going to see more and more of that. And if you think about the announcements that we're making in the next 48 hours, and certainly in the next 24 hours, I think it'll get a lot of attention from people.
I love it. I'm excited. Everybody, speaking of things you should be excited about, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out this other conversation with Peter Diamandis. You're living through an inflection point in human evolution. Between tech like AI, quantum computing, and biotech, the next decade will bring about more dramatic change than the last 100 or even 200 years combined.